Hello and welcome to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Assertitude. On this show, we look at the ways leadership is evolving in our world and share stories from the most brilliant private equity executives, CEOs, thinkers, and doers defining our times. I'm your host, Linnea Jungnelius. Today, I've got a special guest with us, Dominic Gallello, Managing Director and Head of Digital and AI at Bridgepoint, Europe's leading middle market growth investor with 43 billion euro of assets under management. Dominic has a remarkable story from serving as part of the leadership team that led Bumble through its acquisition by Blackstone and IPO to his current operating partner role at Bridgepoint. In this episode, we'll unpack his journeys and learnings on transforming companies through digital and modern growth strategies. Dominic, welcome to the show.
What an introduction. Thanks for having me.
Dominic, let's start from the beginning. I know your career consists of a few interesting chapters. How did you get into this world of digital and growth marketing, and how did your early career on the agency side set you up for success at Airtime, which was Sean Parker's live social app, and subsequently Bumble, the dating app?
So I am half Japanese, half American, and grew up around the world, which really means I grew up on the internet. So I always knew I wanted to be involved with the internet in some ways. So I started joining agencies really as a digital strategist, someone to help companies think through how to go to market within a world where consumers live and breathe the internet and understand whether or not they want to engage with a brand or a company as a result of the conversations that were happening online. And so one of the first places that I entered was helping companies think through how to approach this question of engaging with online forums, for instance, early Twitter, early Instagram, early Facebook, and what type of presence that they should have and how they should engage. And a lot of what that puts into focus for sort of more modern day work that I did with Bumble or even today within the portfolio of Bridgepoint is really understanding that brands stand naked in the eyes of the consumer on the internet. And that means everything that a company does, not only in terms of what it says, but how it delivers that product or value to its customer and the experience that is created throughout is all fundamental towards winning in an internet-driven era of consumption, whether it's a B2B business or a B2C business. And so it was this really exciting time where the internet was really developing and how companies had to transform their thinking about the role of product, the role of marketing, radically transformed. One of the agencies that I spent time at was a company called West, which was a company that really did brand and go-to-market strategy for technology companies. It was founded by the former CMO at Apple, who had really built, everything from iPod commercials through to iPad under Apple. And the way she always described how Apple thought about it was working backwards from the customer and from the product. So they didn't start with, a commercial the way a traditional marketing org did. They started with the unboxing experience of the Apple iPhone and the specific amount of suction that was required as you open the box to make it really feel magical. And that type of thinking is really critical to win in an era where customer experience wins above all. And that drives the advocacy from consumers within an internet space. So, really that notion of how do you connect a unified customer experience with a clear value proposition that you deliver to customers and how you instigate advocacy through consumer internet platforms is really, I think, the model that I carry on in all of my work today.
That's so fascinating. And also, you are speaking to the perfectionist in me.
Yes, exactly.
It is in the details, right?
It is absolutely the details.
Yeah. So talk us through that monumental transformation that you were part of at Bumble. What did the Blackstone acquisition and eventual IPO journey look like from sort of scaling it up to getting acquired and then eventually going public?
So Bumble was at a really critical inflection point at the point of the Blackstone acquisition. We had a remarkable brand that was well known in North America, but we needed to bring that around the world. And one of the other things that we saw as a key transformation lever for the business was just overall operating rigor and the ability to replicate the success that we had in North America more predictably, not only with audiences in North America expanding to new cities, maybe smaller cities or more suburban areas of the United States, but also how we thought about doing that and building the launch playbook for how you go from a neighborhood to a city to multi-city to national coverage within new markets. And so this period of transformation was about how to build a global scaled infrastructure within marketing, one that was able to translate this brand around women make the first move into very different cultural contexts, whether it was Brazil or Israel or India or Indonesia, you name it, we had to flex that brand. Second was really thinking about the use of data. Despite being a brand-driven organization, we were really lucky to just have phenomenal amounts of data. And one of the things that we really implemented in the early days post-Blackstone transaction was really creating enormous transparency around lessons learned. So every time someone in the marketing organization executed a campaign, we would publish the results and the analysis of that very publicly across the company. And my favorite sort of cultural artifact of that was that if you had a campaign that was unsuccessful, that can be, quite a lot of pressure to see that sort of lack of success being broadcasted quite publicly. So what we did was engendered a culture where as long as you posted the lesson on that analysis, if you were the one responsible for that marketing initiative, we would love bomb you with reactions, basically, which was a great way to engender a culture of learning. You gave a gift to the team that, you've learned a lesson that now other people can take away. And so that way, as we, expanded the team globally and the geographic footprint, every time someone joined the company, they were able to learn from the collective wisdom of everyone's actions that came before. And that just made the hit rate of success that much better every time we went into a market. As we were standing up Brazil, we could learn from the successes of Germany. We could learn from the successes of Mexico in order to really figure out how we were going to scale that market. So, quite a lot of operational rewiring really for the company and trying to accomplish that transformation in the midst of an IPO process. I will say there was quite a few sleepless nights in the midst of working from home during COVID.
Yes, I believe when we talked about this, you described it as quite the unsexiest IPO that there may have been.
Deeply. There's no fancy dinners, no, traveling to New York. It was me locked away in my son's now bedroom doing analyst day calls and, trying to keep pace with the incredible work that the IPO team was focused on delivering.
Yeah. I love that philosophy, though, of failing forward. There is a mentor of mine who very early on ingrained in me, and one of the things he loves to say is, the only thing I learned from winning is that I like to win.
That's great.
The only thing I've learned is from my failures, right?
So exactly. I had spent some time at Spotify. They had a value around sort of work out loud, basically, which I always sort of resonated with because when I joined Spotify, it was incredible to just get this access to the collective wisdom of that organization. And so, Bumble had this track record of enormous success. But when I sort of entered the business, it was very hard to, so how did we win in North America? So, well, that was in this person's brain and they may have left the company 6 months ago. That type of institutional knowledge is precious. And so how do you create a culture around learning, around transparency, and around enabling every person to benefit from collective wisdom, for me, is like tenet number one.
And then after Bumble, you joined Bridgepoint. What inspired you to make the leap from operator to operating partner? And what was that transition like?
I think after this period of really trying to solve a specific problem with the company, which was really, how to grow and drive Bumble, what attracted me to the operating partner role was the ability to expand my skill sets and expand my visibility across different sectors and industries. And so from a personal growth standpoint, making that transition from, sort of functional executive in many ways to someone that has sort of transversal awareness and visibility was deeply attractive and continues to be attractive today. And I think sort of that transition from the operator to shareholder perspective has also engendered really a new viewpoint around business that I think is also really exciting. Private equity has a start, middle, and end to their investment cycles. We work backwards from that destination to understand what does the middle need to look like and what steps do we need to take in the beginning. And it creates tremendous clarity, just tremendous simplicity around what are the most important things to get right? And do we have the right people to lead those components? And do we have the resources to deliver and the capability to deliver? And so for me, it's been a transition of, despite going to business school, it is a whole business school on another level because you see different sectors, different challenges, different opportunities, and you get to participate in the value creation process across each of those different thematics.
That's what I love about this space too, the constant learning. One thing that you touched on a little bit is this sort of theme around essentialism. You described how when you were at Bumble as a CMO, you sort of had this endless, exhaustive to-do list, and that it was quite refreshing when you entered the operating partner world, that it was more about zoning in on those few big things that would drive the returns that you're looking for. So what's the lesson there around taking this more simplistic view?
If I think about returning to an operator role after having seen the sort of operating partner perspective and the shareholder perspective, it really comes down to a lack of noise and a focus around the medium to long term and therefore what needs to get done today. Oftentimes in an operating role, you are trying to survive day to day. What is revenue outturn going to look like for this month, this quarter? What are the knobs that I have to tweak in order to deliver on the commitments that I have to my own shareholders? And oftentimes you can lose sight of what are the important transformations that you're trying to deliver. All the things that I described in terms of, transitioning Bumble into a more data-driven organization particularly within the marketing organization, those types of things, of course, occupied quite a lot of my focus, but they were often pulled away from the noises around, well, you have a team member that, might leave and you need to figure out how to replace them, or, they're asking for a raise, or what's my career development journey, and all the typical things that come with management that is fundamentally important. And so that delineation between, what is unfortunately the reality of having to manage an organization versus what is required from leadership in terms of where you want to go and how you want to get there is the privilege of the operating partner. And as much of your time, mental bandwidth, executional energy can be focused on those components of leadership and how you're driving towards that medium to long-term outcome would benefit any other operating executive, I think, and particularly for myself if I were to return to that type of role.
As you think about the archetype of the operating partner, we've discussed a few dominant themes, if you will. Talk us through, in your perspective, what those are and then the pros and cons.
Within the short time that I've been doing this, a few years, I've managed to sort of build a good network of other operating partners, both generalist and specialist. And I think generally there's a few different vectors. There are those that are really sector specialized and in which they have sort of deep track records based upon their own previous operating experience. You have those that are sort of generalist and may come in with more of a consulting mindset. How do I really unpack what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and establish a framework for how the company pursues it. And then you have individuals like myself that are a bit more specialized around a practice, and in my case, really focused around the digital and AI topic for companies. And so, despite these different roles of operating partners that come in at potentially different times of the investment cycle, I think one of the key components is always really the EQ component of an operating partner. This is an influence game, not a mandate game. It's a position where you have to act with significant humility because you really do not understand their business really at all in many ways. You are having to learn on the job, and you are trying to connect experiences that you've had in the past in other sectors and other types of businesses, but relay those lessons to the company that you're then working with. And of course, you have, seasoned executives that are in each one of these companies that lead their functions and are, have helped to drive the business to where it is today, which, at the time that Bridgepoint invests is a really successful enterprise. And so, despite these different archetypes of generalists versus specialists, sector specialized versus agnostic, I think that EQ component weaves throughout.
I hear that all the time. And it sounds like, in particular, a bit of humility, but combined with that intellect piece, right, are really important and go hand in hand. What does it take to not just go from good to great, to be extraordinary at doing this type of work?
I think the people that really succeed at this job are very good at partnering with management and really simply translating Where are they trying to get to, and what actions do they need to take? Management has enough complexity in their lives that they don't need someone coming in and creating more. A good operating partner should be an accelerant and in many ways a secret weapon for management to get done what we as a collective between operating partners, investing team members, and management teams have signed up for in terms of what we're trying to do with the business. And so you need to become the secret weapon for the CEO, the CMO, the CPO, CTO, whoever, and become a strategic steward for them and a connective tissue to the outside world. And so oftentimes what I try and do is connect different executives together. If you're now dealing with a marketing effectiveness question in one portfolio company, how do I connect you to other executives in other portfolio companies that have done that? Or a world of consultants or specialized advisors that can really help accelerate on that opportunity. And so, really sort of being a partner to them, simplifying what are the actions that you should take, making available the experience of others or the potential resources to accelerate for them is really, I think, the simple model for success here.
Great. Yep. Be an accelerant. So at Bridgepoint, what role do you play across the various phases of the investment cycle? Where do you get in to start that acceleration?
Sure. So within the role of this focus around digital and AI topics, it really depends on two types of deals. One is companies that are active in the digital landscape. So ad tech, where we have a couple of deals more recently, are a good example of this, where you're really helping the deal team understand the market quite early in the investment cycle, really from the earliest throes of the idea around the potential investment opportunity through to companies where, they don't necessarily operate in a digital landscape or business, but digital is a key value creation driver. And then it's a little bit later in the due diligence process where you're doing more of that operational DD, less of that sort of commercial DD. And within that operational DD, you're trying to sort of benchmark the general levels of maturity across a number of key operational levers and building a view around should we improve on that lever, whether it's commercial effectiveness, data and analytics, whatever it might be. What is the trade-off between impact and feasibility if we were to intervene on that specific lever? And so, I would say we get involved throughout that due diligence process and help to co-create really the investment case around what are we trying to accomplish with this business in a 4 to 5 year period. Between signing and closing then, once we've aligned around what we're trying to do, then it's about how do you put the foundations in place to make sure that that value creation plan is deliverable. And one of the things that we implement, for instance, is the recruitment of a chief transformation officer, PMO, chief of staff, whatever the appropriate archetype is, to lead that transversal transformation across the business and make sure that we really dig into the value creation plan really in the early ownership period post-close. That way we can sort of go back around the core strategy that we're trying to deliver for the business. How do we scope out what types of interventions are required in order to accelerate that value creation plan? And at that point, it becomes really about that partnership between the portfolio team and the management team in terms of the strategic guidance to be able to deliver on it in the way that I discussed before. So it really is, quite end to end. And it's one where we work in lockstep with the deal teams to make sure that we are all aligned around our perspective. We're aligned around the reality of what it means to deliver on this, and that we have a consistent view around our progress against each one of those initiatives.
Yeah. I love that idea of impact meets feasibility, right? Because I think if you were to go to the CEO consumer base, if you will, the feasibility piece is where the partnership breaks down at times or they feel misunderstood.
And especially with technology in particular, that is a real blind spot for many executives, as it can be. And so being clear around what does the current technical estate of the organization look like? And in order to unlock any of the value levers that we want to deliver on, how much tech debt do we need to resolve? Do we need to do some type of migration or modernization work? That assessment is really critical because oftentimes if you don't account for that, you are ultimately going to incur quite a lot of costs later down the road in order to be able to enable any of the things that you want to do, whether it's, sort of creating a more data-driven sales organization with a RevOps function or, create more sophisticated marketing analytics with personalization, whatever it might be, all of that foundation is really required. And so that feasibility assessment is often around the general maturity state of the technology, of the team, and of the operations. And therefore, what does the effort around the upgrade potentially look like?
And I'm sure it also acts as a filter for you in terms of how you prioritize and how you line up that transformation journey, right?
Deeply, and it informs sequencing in particular. It's a short period of ownership that private equity ultimately has with the enterprise, but within the 4 to 5 years that you do have, you can sequence the costs and the transformations that are associated with the delivery towards that vision much more clearly if you're doing that feasibility assessment quite early.
Right, because again, if you've got this shiny thing over here that could create a lot of value, right? But it depends on putting in place XYZ. I'm sure you go in and you're doing a lot of tackling in some cases.
Deeply,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Dominic, you were talking all about feasibility, which is so critical and so critical to Bridgepoint specifically because your culture could really be encapsulated by the statement, do what you say. Could you share how you've codified that value and how your principles around doing what you say, making things happen like in reality, influence how you manage portfolios?
So do what you say is a really fundamental cultural aspect of Bridgepoint. And a lot of that originated in the early days around Bridgepoint's creation, in this notion that when we talk about creating a deal situation with a management company or with an owner, that we were going to be true to our word and we were going to deliver on that deal in the contours of what was described rather than trying to, do something, perhaps a little bit less straightforward. And I think that is now cascaded into everything that we do, inclusive of how we work with management teams in terms of creating the vision, ensuring that we have alignment around the resources and the timelines required, and that we can provide the appropriate support that helps accomplish that vision. So I think when it comes to the portfolio execution component, when we talk about do what you say, it is really being upfront about our perspectives of where this business is and having a honest conversation with the management team around our findings from due diligence, our views around what we think we can transform this business into, and having a collaborative conversation where the views of management and the views of Bridgepoint that, has been developed through the diligence process find alignment. And that way we come to a unified perspective and we come to a plan where there is joint responsibility and joint accountability. So typically within each one of these value creation initiatives, we set up charters where there is a board sponsor. And, that could be myself. It could be another member of the board from Bridgepoint, helping to, really be the sponsor of that initiative. And then you have a management team member who is really accountable and responsible for delivery of it. And we work together in terms of meeting regularly outside of the boardroom and consistently to try and problem solve around how are we going to make progress on that initiative in order to deliver on it. So I think it is this notion of honesty that comes through in our dialogue, and one where we are very straightforward in our interaction and not necessarily having some, crazy behind the scenes plan that we're not sort of, being necessarily transparent with the management organization. It's about being upfront. So
yeah, well, you touched on a couple things, but is there anything else you do about putting that co-creation into practice and getting the involvement?
I mean, when we talk about we're serious about the value creation that we want to do with a portfolio company. I mean, a simple example would be, the chief transformation officer that we want to recruit in. I mean, this is something that we get actively involved with. And if we need to be creative about how we're going to fund it, we'll be creative about how we're going to fund it. But it's not something where for us, when we talk about we want to drive this value creation process, we also want to be aware that each of the operational leads within a management team are really busy, keeping the lights on of the business. And so we want to make sure that they are fully supported to be able to deliver on the medium to long-term plan, hence the responsibility of that transformation officer, head of strategy, whatever it might be. And so, it is always being respectful of the realities of the management organization and making sure they are equipped to deliver on the collaborative plan that we've put together.
I also want to talk about this in the context of the European middle market, which is where you focus. What are the challenges and themes you commonly find as you get into the trenches with your portfolio companies there?
So I think for the European middle market, what we often find are companies that are leaders in their niches or subsectors and have become national champions and are now encountering the need to go, across continental Europe, but more often than not as well, how to go into the United States. And so the types of companies that we see, particularly, let's say, as with commercial organizations, are companies that have established, let's say, a regional commercial model, so a managing director of France, of Germany, of the Benelux, of whichever. Now, as they become a more global organization, need to do two things. One is be more informed through data, what's really working across these different geographies, and in terms of how they nurture, close, and sort of maintain customer relationships. And then secondly, how do they establish a more centralized function that can service a more global organization? So that notion of, a transition of a sales force or a commercial org, in a very pessimistic sense, regional fiefdoms into one where there is, absolutely the maintenance of that local touch, but serviced and underpinned by this global revenue operations function that is really bringing to light what does great look like when this company succeeds, is a typical type of transformation that we help enable. And one of the things that I think Bridgepoint has great track record in is the fact that we have such deep presence in all of these European markets, as well as in the United States, as well as in China. We are able to really open many, many doors for them in order for that internationalization to be more successful.
And so as you go on these journeys to internationalize, but overall to increase scale, with that comes increased complexity. And so I want to bring it down now to the talent piece and ask you, how do you approach assessing talent and help CEOs think about the construction of their C-suites with all that's coming in the next 5 to 7 years? Sometimes they know what's coming, sometimes they don't, but you do. Talk to me about that.
There is often a dialogue with the CEO in terms of, based upon the strategy that you are trying to deliver on, do you have the right skill sets and accountable individuals to deliver on that? And so, I don't think we get heavily involved in terms of people assessments per se. It is really the responsibility of the CEO to determine who are the star players that they really want on their team. But we do bring a perspective around the types of roles that we think a company should have. If you can imagine, maybe a services organization that is really starting to digitize and maybe moving from a historic consulting-led model, for instance, into one where software is an increasing part of how customers interact with the business, well, you might want to start thinking about a centralized commercial organization, or you might want to start thinking about a chief technology officer, a chief product officer. What we try and do is think about, obviously, what are some of the near-term gaps that the company might have in terms of functional ownership and responsibility within that value creation plan, but also have an eye in terms of that medium to long term. What else are we going to have to add? Executive recruiting, onboarding just takes time. It takes time to get the right person identified. They may have a non-compete, or they may have, in Europe, certainly a long period in which they have their exit period from their old business. And so, really looking ahead in terms of design of the organization at the senior level for us is very critical to make sure we can deliver on the strategy that we've set out, and making sure that strategy skills assessment is always in play in terms of how we understand whether we are fully resourced from a human capital perspective to deliver on the plans at hand.
I also want your views on the European landscape at the moment. Talk to me about where you're seeing sparks of optimism, opportunities, and what you're going after.
In the macro level, Europe, by comparison to, the sort of Mustang of America, I suppose, is always a really tough comparison. But within Europe, you still have really specialized industries that are showing phenomenal growth and with tremendous potential. And that could be within the industrial space, whether it's in agriscience or whether it's in energy transition technologies, whether it's in the services world, whether, info services. There's a number of these areas where Europe does have unique and distinct talent pools and an ecosystem of companies that really can become amazing international and global organizations as a whole. So I think, what I see as huge opportunities within the European landscape is how do you elevate and internationalize these national champions, and ultimately how do you digitize them to make them more efficient and best in class in terms of customer experience. That for me is really always quite exciting. And oftentimes the ability to hop those borders for European company is where you unlock these new waves of growth potential that within an American market is actually quite tough because you're in such a single market in many ways where the competitive boundaries are much clearer, and therefore it's a lot harder to be able to find growth if you're not competing at the highest level.
Exactly. Well, we'll have to talk with my Swedish background about the Swedish landscape after specifically. I don't know how big that is.
Deeply. But a lot of, Swedish national champions that have managed to grow. And, we have great experiences with some of our Swedish portfolio. Vitamin Well, an incredible energy drink that has managed to grow, including into the United States. It's been a phenomenal success story for us. So there's always these gems within Europe that you can elevate to become real global champions.
Yep. Fläder would be my favorite flavor there.
There you go. There you go.
The words artificial intelligence are literally in the title of your job. How are you harnessing generative AI? The ultimate question. I'm sure you get it every day.
So I think we achieved the first plateau of generative AI following the unveiling of GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. Since then, we've found some incremental progress in terms of underlying models. But let's say that we're midway through the sort of first chapter of generative AI. For us at Bridgepoint, it's really twofold. One is how are we using it internally? We were one of the first 25 customers of OpenAI on ChatGPT Enterprise. So, we've actually just crossed a year in terms of deploying it at the enterprise level internally. And then second is obviously enabling a number of the use cases within the enterprise and within the portfolio. So on the internal basis, I think a lot of what we're finding is how is it accelerating a lot of the manual tasks that a lot of our colleagues are having to do, whether it's helping to really quickly synthesize huge amounts of information that come off of a data room for a company, or as a result of our consulting firm's love of writing within commercial DD reports or tech DD reports and everything else, to get to the essence of the question that we are trying to answer within our investment committee process. Second is for anything where there's sort of a bit of a routine process. So that could be in origination, sort of just company descriptions. Within investor relations, it could be how do you formulate the draft of DDQ responses. There's a number of these areas where we've been able to create custom applications that are now driving and automating a lot of our processes. A really good example would be for portfolio companies. As I get board reports and as I get, consulting reports, I upload those into a portfolio-specific app that is trained on the knowledge of that portfolio company. It makes the drafting of portfolio committee papers a bit easier when you can draft off of all of that underlying knowledge. What it's not doing today is making significant decisions. What it's not doing is really thinking about different tasks on a more automation level, where you're sort of fully automating specific work streams. But I think that will come as the sort of next stepping stone and the next chapter of the underlying model starts to evolve. So we're all waited with, bated breath for the next great leap forward in terms of underlying architecture for these foundational models in order to unlock those use cases. The portfolio is quite the same. I mean, we see a lot of great use cases in sales automation in terms of customer support, but for like the real transformation of the enterprise, we're not quite there yet, unfortunately. So a lot of the use cases show the potential for what the future will look like, but we actually need those models to improve a bit more in order for us to see, massive transformations of accountancies or legal service firms or anything else like that. So, software engineers haven't been fully automated out yet. So, we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. But we're all drowning in a mountain of paperwork.
Deeply.
Yes.
So hopefully, at least that pain is a little bit alleviated.
Yeah, exactly. We're also waiting for the unveiling of Dominic GPT.
Yes, exactly. I was sharing earlier that I've managed to alleviate some of my own personal pain by training GPT internally on all of my own writing, and that makes the answering of questions a little bit easier. Now, we don't have just yet GPT-4o to go from text to voice, so I could have just stuck up my phone and had this interview through my GPT app. But maybe one day we'll get there. And
no, let's not go there. In person is much better.
Well, it might have better humor, so we'll see.
This is all true. How are you personally using AI to enhance your everyday?
It is a lot of small tasks right now. That could be as simple as if I get raw data from a portfolio company, for instance. Let's say it's marketing spend data by channel and by day, and I want to run Monte Carlo simulations off of that, right? ChatGPT's data analytics module is really good for that. And so rather than giving that out to an analyst that I don't have, I now have the ability to really quickly run analysis and be very quick in my understanding of what's going on inside of a portfolio company just based upon raw data sets. I think the second topic is a lot around, again, that sort of document ingestion. But what are the things that are different beyond just please summarize a commercial due diligence document? It might be as I go through the development of a diligence report, from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, trying to draw out what are the differences and insights that we have. Where has there been a shift in understanding within that company? It allows you to identify that much clearer. And that's also true for our deal team partners, by the way, when they're looking at investment committee papers. Our committee members are often referencing what's the difference between IC 1 and 2 and where has there been change. And that's also true in our portfolio management committee process. So, it's often where you have large amounts of either structured or unstructured data and you are trying to get to the heart of what matters. It is becoming an accelerant to be able to find those answers much more, which has been really helpful. Makes you focus on the actions much more rather than spending too much time on the insights. Doesn't negate the need for human analysis, but certainly accelerates it.
Exactly. Yeah. And let's get off the work topic now. What things do you do outside of work, outside of the data rooms, outside of the mountains of paperwork that allow you to show up as your best self every day?
Sure. So I am a runner, and it is the most important thing that I probably do in my life. And I don't always get to do it as often as I like. It's a way to just moderate the self and create the well-being that you need in order to be your best self every day. And actually, visiting New York, my favorite run in New York is cutting across 14th Street and then running around the peninsula of Manhattan. I call it the pizza run because it's shaped like a pizza. The run also happens to start and end at Joe's Pizza on 14th Street. But, it is a way for me to just sort of circle the city and feel that I'm not sort of overwhelmed by the grandness of New York City. It's a way for me to, let's say, assert my control over the city, to say I just ran a lap around the city. And so for me, it's just a critical way to moderate through physical exercise the emotional and mental self as much as possible. So, and I know you're a huge runner, so, I don't know if you have a favorite run.
That is a great run. There's nothing that motivates quite like the carbs.
Exactly.
I ran the Paris Marathon, all for the croissants and...
Well, whenever I run in Paris, I just do a sort of a rectangular loop around the Seine. I call it the baguette run.
Yep.
And
exactly.
There's a reason for the start
croissants,
and stop
the
location.
baguettes,
Absolutely.
The macaroons. I don't discriminate. No, my favorite run here probably is, I love the Central Park loop, just getting into the park, the greenery, the nature. But I love the West Side Highway too.
And, whenever I travel as well, I get to go to different portfolio companies and get to travel different cities. There's nothing like experiencing culture through the culture of running. You come to New York, you run the Central Park Loop, and it is like a competitive highway of type A personalities. You go to London and it's people that are, a little bit, like, let's say, a bit more courteous in some ways, not super aggressive, out there enjoying themselves. You go to Amsterdam, it's every city has its own different culture, and it's just absolutely my favorite way to experience different people.
That is me, Dominic. I feel like I'm out there and it's like a race every morning.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to sign up for a 5K.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any leaders that are inspiring you lately?
One of the people that I think really struck me as deeply inspiring is a bit odd, but a guy named Hardis Geezer, an English bloke who ran from the southern tip of Africa to the northern tip of the continent to Tanzania. But I think what was really inspiring for me about him was just the transparency by which he documented his entire experience, the unwavering commitment to the mission, despite the fact that people called him absolutely insane, the community that he built around him through the function of broadcasting his everyday experience of running. And, it was, I don't even know the mileage, but it took him 360 days of running. It was like 40 kilometers a day or 50 kilometers a day. I mean, I thought that was really inspiring. And for me, it's always these different people who do the unimaginable and show that it's both possible and really hard and are more transparent around inspiring others, for me is always really exciting. Actually, he had just finished running it, and I happened to go to Disneyland Paris with my son and ran into him at the Disneyland Hotel. And for me, it was like meeting an absolute celebrity. My son was really excited to meet Goofy, and here I was running up to this like crazy English guy being like, I am such a huge fan of what you accomplished. So.
Yeah. The piece there that's so inspiring to me also is seeing these people show up, and they're all in pain at some point. Like, I've never seen blister under blister under blister. But they go out and they are committed to the mission, and they still have the sparkle in their eyes.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
And the thing with Hardest Geezer is he is insane.
Yeah.
He is categorically insane. But that's what's required in order to do the unimaginable. Show up every day, run 50 kilometers every day. He ran through jungle, he ran through desert, he got kidnapped at one point, he was stopped at borders. I mean, what he went through was insane. And for fellow runners, that is deeply inspiring. And for non-runners, that might be deeply obnoxious.
Yeah. Exactly. Look, any other sources where you draw personal inspiration from? Books, podcasts, content?
I always think the journey of entrepreneurs is always fascinating to watch. And, there are so many lessons to be learned, even if you're operating at a large scale, in terms of what entrepreneurs at really the startup stage are going through. I have a large network of friends who are entrepreneurs, from Silicon Valley, being from San Francisco. And for me, it's always really exciting to learn from, again, their perseverance. Entrepreneurism is about survival every day. Is the business going to survive? While simultaneously being almost delusional in optimism around the change that you can create into the future. And I think that is always really a place that anyone in a company, whether you're at the mid-market level or the enterprise level, can learn from, because it's a relentless focus on execution. It's a focus on what matters. It's a emotional perseverance to deal with the really, really tough reality of creating a business. And for me, that's always really inspiring. And so, great resources as well. Sam Altman, before doing OpenAI, had a great YouTube series called How to Start a Startup, where he brought everyone from, Peter Thiel to Brian Chesky to the Collison brothers to talk about what's required to build a company. That inspired the Blitzkrieg book by Reid Hoffman and a subsequent series at Stanford. So I always think going back to the foundational tenets of entrepreneurialism is always a source of inspiration.
Yeah, totally agree. All right. So at the end of every show, we like to define brilliance in a few ways. We're going to get into a fun lightning round where I'm going to ask you a series of statements and would love it if you could please fill in the blanks. Purpose is?
Purpose is a gift you give to the world.
Leadership is?
Leadership is a focus on the long term in spite of the challenges of the short term.
Success is?
Success is the impact you make on people.
Brilliant leaders are?
Brilliant leaders are deep misfits.
Love it. I'm also going to ask you, brilliant digital and AI leaders are?
Brilliant digital leaders are empathetic, not robots.
I perform at my best when?
I perform at my best when I've had a run and a hug from my son.
Thank you to Dominic Gallello of Bridgepoint for joining us on today's episode. I hope all of you walk away as inspired as I am to focus on the few big things that truly matter. Spend time co-creating, enabling, and modernizing. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. That's it for this episode of the Brilliant People Podcast. I'm Linnea Jungnelius. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. And follow Assertitude on LinkedIn for the latest insights on how to lead and perform at your best. Until next time, stay brilliant at work and hit the road for a run.